and invited the first few days, which caused my mind to reel, as it was completely unnatural feeling. It violated rule number 1 of knife use, which is always cut away from yourself, and most especially when significant force is used. Once a blade moves through a tough section of root, it might hit a soft patch. Stopping the blade without cutting oneself was a constant risk. We all wore taped-up gloves. He had supplied old leather gloves, and my friend gave me a pair of cut-resistant gloves for Christmas. I was grateful for that, and they saved me from some deep cuts. I still got myself a number of times, as one tends to wear out spots from repetitive strikes. The dividing finally finished around March. Everyone else had quit before then. There were some things that came up with the farm owner's behavior that I felt needed to be addressed, knowing full well the end result of that conversation would be me packing up. It was at the end of a pay period and a good stopping point. I liked the guy enough, and he had wanted me to stay on, but it was the way he had talked and acted towards women, including those that worked for him, that pushed me to do it. I left him with something to think about, but like usual, it came at a personal price. I was back to living in a van. Fortunately, I was not in a van for too long. I was offered 2 house-sitting gigs, feed the pets. They briefly overlapped. And long story short, a 19-year-old dog died within the first week of the second house, and I had to do last rites and bury the poor, pitiful-looking creature. There was still a cat to feed. The place had been rather dirty, and I did my best to sanitize the living area. I was pretty far out of town. The eclipse was just around the corner, and I felt pulled like I should do whatever to get there, down to Texas. The biggest reason, though, was because she had begun sending me newsletters out of the blue. I had been avoiding watching her work for many months, but it was too much. I ran out of money there for a time. An alternator broke shortly, and I asked for rides to fix it since I was 10 miles from town. I felt then, when it was happening, that I might be missing something again, but it was so far away, and my mind again had fallen into the same traps that made a feat like that impossible. I felt the same hopelessness and overwhelming despair. Sometime during the period of that first house sitting at Habitat for Humanity, I had run across a lady and her partner, whom I had met before during a holiday party at the flower farm. She had said that she had also owned a farm, and I had been interested in checking it out. She needed help, she said, and I agreed to the work. Much of it was blackberry clearing. It was a lot of blackberries. I got better and better at it, hacking larger and denser spots. A large 2-handed scythe became my favorite tool for clearing. She grew succulents, and therefore gardening that I helped with. After the second house owner returned from a cruise around a portion of Africa, we had talked, and she was okay with me staying there in exchange for helping out around. But the other farm owner also wanted me to stay on her property, and since that's where there was work at, along with the YMCA, where I did yoga 3 times a week, much closer, it seemed the wiser decision, and I moved over there. Rewrite all that. This farm owner owned 3 farm properties in the area, she said, inherited from her mother. 2 were next to each other. On the other side of the road was a large barn, built before permits were required, built from solid timber. She wanted to sell that barn and property, but needed help getting it ready. So we cleared a bunch of stuff, covered over the holes in the walls and floors, slapped paint all over it. By the end of it, it was a gallery, literally, because her father was had been a professional artist, and she had all of his unsold work. So patiently, with her, I had hanged artwork all over the place. There was a darker aspect. There had been additions added inside the top level of the barn, 2 additional floors on one side and an overlook made from pill pole and cantilevered pretty far. The roof trusses themselves were all on a lean of several feet from bottom to top. Structurally, I was not sure of the building. No one was, but they wanted to sell it, and I foresaw that with enough money, some engineers, someone else might get to it within code somehow. And I agreed that selling it was the best choice. But the dark aspect is because I recognized the place and the two people from a dream I had a year or so previous. The dream had been strange, with a haunting vibrance. An older couple, but not married. An old house leading down some rickety stairs into darkness, a feeling like this whole place was going to fall down around me. No reason for me to stay. The people I was sure were the same as the ones in my dream. Sometime after staying there, I spotted something else. That I was on mile 6 of the highway, of what turns into Highway 6. And if the place had had a mailbox on that side, on that road, it appears that its address would have been around 660. Seriously. And it turns out downtown Tillamook itself is at mile marker 66 on the 101. Living with such weird madness, and not finding an escape. We got the barn in condition to put up for sale, and because it was important to the farm owner, she had an event to clear the energy. We were to have a local band play. As it happened, things aligned. And 8 months after I had said goodbye to my son, he came to Tillamook for that weekend. Exactly 8 months. And so we jammed out. I invited my doctor friend. There were some good 40 to 50 people there. It was a pretty cool and unique experience. The acoustics were quite phenomenal. There were people exploring the lofts, and all was fine. An example of normality bias. Amazing how trusting humans are. And then I received another newsletter with news of another event, and much closer, in Laytonville, California, which was just 20 minutes away from the property I had once lived at and wrote about in my first book. I had to go, and it was on a solstice with full moon. Short on funds, I volunteered in advance for a discount. Counting down the days, I woke from a dream of her in June. And a little while that morning, I received word that my mother's mother had passed. A week earlier, I had seen an omen that had accurately foretold me that, though. Considering what was happening in the dream and that news, it left me with a weird feeling. I knew I needed funds both for California and to try to make the funeral. I knew my first priority, and it wasn't the funeral, but I still fretted. No news of a time or place had reached me before I left south, but there was one thing I needed to do before I left, and that was burn the giant pile of blackberry vines I had heaped from all around the property. And so we had a little bonfire with me tending coals into the night. A few days later, I left. An order of my books had been on their way, but arrived after I chose to leave. Oh well, guess that wasn't in the cards, I had thought. I drove south along the 101, arriving just before midnight, before they shut the gates of the Black Oaks Ranch, parked amongst a small scatter of other early arrivals. Somehow I was assigned 3 day shifts in one day at the welcome desk. I met everyone coming in to some degree, and there was the list. I admit that I checked her check-in status. She hadn't arrived that day, and then I was free the rest of the gathering to do as I liked. It was rather hot outside and certainly drier, but I parked in a shady area, and that gave me respite from the sun. It was a few days in when I first saw her, sitting on the grass, looking as she had just arrived, but she was still magnificent. I was totally grounded and chill. At one point, she got up and walked past me in a full flowery dress and sun hat. Just a few feet away, I could feel her energy, fiery and flustered. But did not make a move. Okay. I could feel her energy, fiery and flustered, but did not make a move to signal attention. My preference would be to approach her when she was in a good mood, not straight off the road. I wouldn't want someone demanding my attention when I was blatantly unwinding. She gave no indication that she recognized me. And I kept my distance until the next day, the day of the solstice, when I ran into her and decided to go with it. My face was completely shaven, and I looked substantially different. I gave a little hand wave. "Hi," I said. "Do I know you?" she asked. "Yes," I replied back. Her whole energy shifted suddenly, and she took a step back. "Are you blank blank?" she asked. "I am," I replied. I don't know how to properly explain the real-time pain I felt witnessing her react to me in that way. I could barely speak, like the words didn't want to come out again, and that I could barely hold on to a basic plan. "Please, have a heart-to-heart with me," I asked, croaking out. "I wouldn't feel comfortable alone with you," she responded. "Please," I softly implored, feeling suddenly that all that mattered by how she would respond. "Bring someone with you that you trust." I didn't know how to follow that with any more dialogue. She requested that I give her space and time, and I agreed. It was all I could do to have that simple and incredibly cringy conversation of less than 30 seconds. Her energy and the way my body responded to it was overwhelming. Only her. I spent the rest of the day avoiding running into her, hanging out with several people I had met, and having long in-depth conversations on some interesting topics. I did plan to see and watch her workshop about her book. I love her work, and I loved watching her evolve. Hanging out with a new friend, I remember noticing a frog with spindly legs and its distinctive hopping. Sometime after midday, I was overheating on a walk and decided to jump into the creek at a spot where I could just dump my shorts and cool off in the creek. I noticed two people following me, but my attention was attracted by a drone flying 20 feet overhead. Drones make me uncomfortable unless I know why they are there and whom is controlling it. I watched too many videos of drones being used in Ukraine. They are unsettling to me, especially while deciding if I will get naked in front of an unknown camera. The person next to me might have said something I didn't fully register. I look over, and it's her with someone else tagging behind that she seemed to be speaking to. I was there to swim. I said to her that this is a clothing optional swimming zone. According to that sign up the hill, still very much preoccupied and distracted by the fact that there was a drone overhead. "I am doing it," I said, referring to cooling down, and I disrobed in front of her. She walked away as I hopped naked from rock to rock. I had wanted to follow, but she had not sufficiently stated that she was there to talk to me, and I had agreed to give her space. I could not follow, for if I was wrong, then I would have definitely blown it. Plus, this was all happening in a few short and fragmented seconds. The one thing I did notice was her energy was different. I leapt into the water at a more horizontal angle than usual, since the turbid water was shallow. Pain instantly flared into my head as water shot into my sinuses from the strained angle and exacerbating an existing sinus blockage that had been on the recent mend. It was bad. I didn't linger in the water and headed back towards my tent with my head pounding. It had half occurred to me that she had followed me to have that conversation, but she had disappeared and I couldn't chase her no matter how much I wanted to. It was such a horrible moment. That frog. I just want to forgive oneself for something like that, not having the proper initiative. Oh, for what I would have given to do that differently, even just minutes later. The headache grew worse and worse. Cannabis barely helped. I waited until I thought her presentation had already started. My eyes were extremely light sensitive, even with sunglasses on. As I approached the spot, I noticed people still milling about. I had my own fancy cushion and sat near the back behind the camera set up to record. The pain was excruciating, and as she began, overly quick at first for the first few minutes, like the other times I watched her in front of an audience, I realized I could not really look at her for the pain. Quick glances between the waves. I closed my eyes and meditatively remembered to reach downwards into the center, into the earth. I remember projecting my love for her and for her work, and that I loved watching her well-deserved success. And then the earth moved. I felt something squirming under my booty, like a wave, and then another, and I looked up at her, sending a serious questioning look up of surprise. Again, more waves, and others realized they were feeling a minor earthquake. It was on USGS when I checked later. It happened. And also another important side note sign. There was this guy there whose whole thing was stack rocks, large rocks, and he was pretty dang good at it. Apparently, he has flown around the world doing stacking gigs. He had finished his work, 7 stacks and a peace sign. I did have a glancing and nearly unrememberable thought on passing it once earlier. A part of that destructive aspect always rearing its head. What would it take to collapse it all at once? After having pondered if people ever knocked down his work on purpose. Anyways, glancing thought. And it did happen. The stacks all fell. And to me, this was a strong representation both of Babylon in 3 pieces and the walls coming down. The macro on the lower on the macro. The next day I ran into her again and decided to see if she would at least listen to the things I needed to say to her. Walking in a group of women, they seemed to form a protective bubble around her. No, she did not want to talk to me. No, she would not listen. Forcing me to walk backwards for a second just to utter the words. She would not hear anything I would say. I knew I had lost the chance. One of the women stayed behind to relay words. And while I appreciate the sentiment, that was not helpful. I was crushed then and shed tears in a sorry state for hours upon my hammock. To that reflection, to be seen as a beast by someone that you admire, respect, and feel only love for, is so incredibly heavy and can only be experienced. I did my best to stay positive after the event. Returning to Tillamook, I had discovered like-minded people and maybe some good would come out of it. Then she sent me an email in early July, the only communication she had made with me in years. She demanded to me to never again contact or attend any event where she was at, or she would get a restraining order. I responded by posting a video on her page on 7/7, which got some views. So I assumed she must have watched it too. Recorded on the eve of July 4th, I argued some fair points with the energy of fireworks behind me. In it, I said I would meet with her anywhere to have this conversation, even if it was a courtroom, albeit that was not my preference. That human courts do not have authority over me. That no person had authority over me, no judges, no politicians, and no CEOs. That I had survived my previous head wound, referring to the madness I had overcome thus far, while shaking my head side to side. And 6 days later, Trump was shot in the ear. Miraculously close. Perfect shot, I thought. I had never felt that it was time for him to be out of the game. It seemed he was still useful, and my preference was to avoid that likely civil war if he was assassinated. And I wanted to see how this would play out. That little bit of blood theater I knew won him the presidency. However, that event also solidified an understanding of the prophecies. There are multiple therions, meaning beasts or wild animals in the visions. The first therion was 7 heads and 10 horns. One is of the 7th, become of the 8th. Trump. There's also another therion, like a ram with 2 horns. And authority of the first beast belongs to this one, which is me, as I have shown proof of both by solving the riddle of 1318 and by proving 1313, along with others. Yet not just signs on behalf of myself, but signs for the first beast, an image of my creation, which has served an important role. Now here's where conventional translation gets to be hairy and is absolutely necessary to look at every Greek word used for greater understanding. For example, the word drakon, translated as dragon, means to see. Given the power to see is different than given the power from a dragon. I can see clear now too. However, it wasn't long before I felt worse for some of the other things I had said. Some of it may be true and accurate, but that I did not enjoy afterwards the way I had felt. I had called her out on a lack of integrity and seeming hypocrisy. I didn't feel good about that. I felt fully and utterly crushed. The pain of it. She didn't have to go that far, so I had thought. I had reacted harshly, seizing on what I knew was an opportunity, using the anger from the pain to dish out a serving of the kind she had dished out on others. Afterwards, it ate at me. I began to shut down inside. I couldn't function properly or communicate what was going on to anyone. The farm situation fell apart as I ran out of steam. On my birthday, I was praying to God at a secluded spot on some dunes in Pacific City, praying for this to be over, praying for my own death over and over. Totally miserable. Another lonely birthday. Then in September, things shifted. I had moved into my van after the situation on that second farm had deteriorated, and it brought a sense of foreboding. Using the resources at my disposal, some pipes, a piece of plywood, a foam mattress, and some 2x4s I purchased with all the spare change I had, I built a bed for my van and some shelves. Livable. But I had considerable stuff left in storage because of not having money. I had stopped using nicotine and weed, and my reality became even stranger with the sobriety. I became lost in madness, exploring the coastline, searching for clues of something. Moving almost every night, there was a sense that I was playing a game with something. My psychosis grew and grew, every message translating through a filter, and thusly, too, so did the incessant manifestations. Something had shifted inside me, and I remembered my primal side, discovering beaches, only accessible during the lowest tides, jumping from rock to rock, getting in the ocean, finally, at last, the beauty, feeling her, yelling at the moon, my heart intermingled with the madness few ever discover. Like before, I had sought to use intuition as a guide, and here is what really set me off. On a beach, I had felt pulled to examine some artwork painted on an outcropping of rock in a small sea cave. Examining for more clues, I had found a half-torn tarot-like card buried in the sand. Frantically, I had searched all around, but did not find the other half. I didn't recall ever seeing the tarot design before. What got me was on the back side, which was a sketch of a mansion-like building with the numbers 1891, my birth year, in reverse. The front side, a woman submerged underwater with 3 sticks across the back, drowned the way I felt. My thoughts went everywhere, from high-level Masonic initiations to palpable concern I was being tested, with a life and death scenario in play. I cannot express adequately what that state was like. When everything might be a clue, you find clues. When you shift into a non-ordinary mindset and are also a powerful manifester, the combination magnifies each other. There was no off switch. I was in survivor mode, but caught playing out something that did not seem helpful to bettering my own situation. I had dreams of her during this time period, and they seemed the realest thing, more than being awake. I felt so close to finding her. There was a night while camping near Garibaldi, on the 4th of September, that a strange wind blew in from the east. At the time, it made no sense. Nights had already become cooler, except for this night of the wind. What was unusual was that it was a hot wind, so warm that I was comfortable, naked, on top of my van at midnight. It howled all through the darkness and never-ending gusts. I noticed a smell of smoke and became a little on edge, wondering if the smoke was from a fire somehow, advancing towards me with a single road down to escape. That would be a karmic ending, I had thought. It really did feel like a damned game was being played upon me. As the toll of the madness played out, I began to rebel. No, she must come to me. I was done. I would not chase her. There must be a properly extended invitation, not a head game and extreme fuckery. Oh, but the madness was so sweet, too. I felt enlivened by it. I began to remember how to love being in my body again and to feel the ocean spray and that connection with existence that only happens outside of habituation. There were other strange qualities to that month. With sobriety came a ravenous hunger. It was like my body knew it needed to add some weight. I think I put 10 pounds on in a few weeks, except I went from shitting like clockwork to not for a full week, and then I was really concerned. Where was all this food going? After an enema tent in the woods didn't solve the issue, I decided to break that sobriety fast with some tobacco tea, and it did work. My digestion seemed to like and need nicotine and coffee. I retained a mass socially, but just barely. Knowing that you have lost your mind is not the easiest of situations to rectify, especially when one is wondering if some type of magic was playing out. A mental map of the area began to blossom in my mind, and I was cognizant of different energies in each area, almost like cardinal points or a clock, the center being Bay Ocean, a community built on the spit over 100 years ago, now barren of roads and structures. It had been a resort for the wealthy, and in its beginning there had been no roads accessible by sea passages. There had been no roads, and it was accessible by sea passages only, with yachts ferrying passengers from Portland, and the wind and water had cleared it all away. I had wondered if some wealthy occultist a century prior had done something there. Had I been drawn to Tillamook, like I had been drawn to real communities from in a potential magical track? There's a large hexagram north of LA in the desert, visible from satellite. The lines from the angles where it extends eastward project a small window. With the home there I had rented inside that window. I had discovered that when I had started writing the first book in the fall of 2022. After I had sent some pictures of that geographical weirdness, she had stopped responding. I thought it strange. I thought it interesting, and something that she might find interesting. But with the silence, I began wondering if it was magical. pulling at me, or possibly connecting me. With the madness pulling me to Hebo Mountain, a fair stretch of it being national forest, I wound up for the night at a spot off the side of a forest road. I kept trying to resist the urge to go further and possibly run out of gas or get stuck. No, I would say to myself, not doing it. That location did yield some surprises, though. The next morning I found large patches of lobster mushrooms. I admit that I misidentified them at first, thinking they were chanterelles. Turns out they were lobsters, which are a form of parasitic fungi that take over other types of mushrooms and change their color, shape, and flavor. Even toxic mushrooms are said to be transformed into an edible variety once changed. I fried them up for the next week in meals. Barely tasty. There was a strong smell there that I had kept catching in the air like death. It took me a while the next day with my nose in hypersensitive mode and me crawling around in another tree sniffing before I discovered the source. Along the roadside, someone had dumped a large mass of rotting fish and other sea creature remains. The embankment was a roiling pile of fish skeletons, scales, fins, and thousands upon thousands of maggots. I had never seen a sight of death and decay like that before. The stench seemed to cling to my skin, and I spent some time sanitizing myself with wipes and changing clothes. The third was a dream. It was a different kind. Not of her as in other locations. In it, I was a being of immense power, a lord of demons, and I was preparing for battle. There was an uncanny lucidity to it, and a peculiar feeling upon waking up, different and not as clean. It felt as though the spot was dark and I had changed. Dark thoughts flourished, and it was beyond me to fully keep them silenced. Several messages derived from it: 15 days' time and Mexico. There was no foreseeable way for me to do that, get down there to Mexico. Whatever trust in my dreams was already shaken. I could gamble with the last of my money, or I could go violently psycho to find the means, but those were not things I was willing to do. It is interesting when one truly explores those boundaries within. This mindset and set of conditions allowed for that. Would I? No. I do not wish to harm others. I could not. Even with alien-like emotions sweeping through me, I would not, but I explored them. Getting down to the last of my money, I had deposited a $20 bill from 1981 that I had kept in my wallet for many years. Because a clerk had refused to accept the bill, thinking it was a forgery, I had kept it in my wallet for years. What would it be like to hold up a bank? I had allowed myself to wonder. A few days later, at that Wells Fargo branch in Tillamook, where I had deposited it, someone tried robbing the bank. Unsuccessfully, I might add, unless he was looking for prison time. Some people do. That is big news for Tillamook. It is a rare event, and I was leaking.